every person in the Middle East knows about. It's like, as I said, you put people on a train and you say it's going to go into a nice place, and then you stop the train and they get out and there's nothing. And not surprisingly, they're all very upset and disappointed. This disappointment shows itself in very high rates of unemployment, in long periods of job search that Raghi mentioned. And the part that we don't quite know about is this problem because something on the supply side or the demand side. A lot of the work that we have done has been on the supply side, looking at how, for example, education is not productive, how it doesn't count, and so on. But on the demand side, we haven't done enough to find out whether the problem might be in that area. Let me show you these slides very quickly about human capital quantity. And I'm probably going to just stick with this one, not show everything to save time. If you look at the average years of schooling for the population 25 years and older, and these are the numbers you get from Barrow and Lee, and then you regress that, the average years of schooling on GDP per capita, that's not showing on these slides. It's the x-axis on the log of GDP per capita. You're getting a sense of what level of schooling should societies have if they are this rich or that rich, right? And you find all Middle Eastern countries are below this average line, except for Jordan, which seems to have just about the level of education that is predicted by its income per capita. If you look at average years of schooling for population 25 years and older, if you look at those completed secondary schooling, men and women, you see they're also below, except that women are doing slightly better on the right-hand side. And if you look at tertiary education, it's about the same, except now men are doing better in some countries, doing better in tertiary education. Percent of young people in their late 20s who have completed tertiary education. If you go to the gender gap, then the gender gap tends to decline. This is the difference between years of schooling of men and women. You expect the gender gap to decline with income, hence the negative slope of the predicted line, where most Middle Eastern countries, except the Sudan, are above the line, meaning they have bigger gender gaps than expected given their incomes. If you look at the quality of human capital, well, the only evidence really we have, which is a numeric answer to this question, how good is the learning that's taking place in the schools, we go to international tests like TIMSS, and all the countries here in 2011 that participated in this round of TIMSS in math scores and science, they scored below the average. The international average is about 500. And all the countries you can see here, and some rich ones, didn't do well at all. If you graph the TIMSS scores against GDP, again, getting a sense of if the learning is commensurate with the available resources, income per capita, you find most Middle Eastern countries are below that average. And again, the gender gap is kind of negatively sloped. That means you get richer. The gap between the math scores of men and women, boys and girls here, I should say, these are 8th graders, 14 years old, is declining. But in Middle East, there are a few countries where the gender gap is below, well, this is actually the opposite. Girls are doing better in Tunisia and Iran, and the other countries, they're doing worse. Now, I want to talk about about returns to schooling. So why do people seek schooling if it's not that advantageous? Well, as Raghi has well demonstrated in one of the most cited papers to come from this ERF crowd, 1997 paper, where he showed that the promise of public employment was the main driver of people wanting to get to school. And this has a terrible consequence. I'm reminded of a passage from Saleh's Season of Migration to the North, where he describes a boy being recruited to go to school by a soldier who's on a horseback and is wearing a fancy hat, and says, the kid says, why should I go to school from a dusty village in the Sudan? And the guy says, well, you'll get this, you'll get that, you'll be learned. And the kid says, will I be able to wear a hat like yours? And the soldier says, yes. And the kid jumps on the back of the horse, and the rest is history. It hasn't changed much since then in terms of why do you want to go to school. Not a hat, soldier's hat, but something mysterious. We did some work. This is a paper we did several years ago with Raghi and Insan, before the harmonized microdata became available. And one of the things we saw was that returns to education, unlike in many other countries, was convex. The relationship between years of schooling and the returns was convex, meaning that all the returns are at the very end. Most of the time in economic theory, this is how we think, that you want some education, you go buy that, and you get the returns. If you want more, you go get more. And as you get more and more education, the returns begins to decline, and then eventually you stop. Here, it seems like the opposite. There's very little return for a long time. You wait and wait and wait, and then you get the return, and then you go out, and then again continue to wait for a job. If you had time to look at this graph, what you would see, this table and the small print, you will see that there is very little return to technical and vocational education. All the good stuff happens in the tertiary level. And another thing that's kind of surprising, that the most developed market of these three, which is Turkey, behaves quite differently from Egypt, the least developed. In Egypt, there were more, this is for men 20 to 54. For this group, the percentage who had a tertiary education in Egypt was more than twice that of Turkey. This is for the early 2000s. And that was very surprising, because you would think that the country that's more developed, Turkey, with per capita income nearly more than twice Egypt, that it would have had more tertiary education. But this is a clue that the reason why people are getting education is not because of productivity, which is why in Egypt you might get randomly more educated people, more people with tertiary degrees than in Turkey. And in Turkey, interestingly, returns to vocational training is much higher, 3 times as high as in Egypt. So private returns are high. This is part of which explains partly this puzzle of why people seek education. But the other part of the puzzle is that there are so low social returns. There was a study done in 1999 by Land Pritchett for MENA region that found that increases in human capital, meaning measured by years of schooling, education, played no role in explaining output. Same phenomena was found by Makdisi, Fattah, and Limam in 2007 in a paper that was published in a book about the Middle East. They also found out very little influence from education measured by years of schooling on the rate of growth. So as education grows, output does not seem to be growing. One of the studies that Raghi was the main force behind, we looked, it was a paper that Raghi, Caroline Kraft, and myself wrote. The study for the first time was based on a tracer study of graduates. We looked at graduates in Egypt and Jordan, graduates from IT and business. And we followed them, we found them, and we asked them, what have you been doing? And when we looked at the data from that study, we found out that some of the things you think matters, like going to school, getting a good education, going to a good university, a university that perhaps is private, where the school parameters, university parameters like teacher, student, and so on, all those scores didn't explain the wages or the quality of the jobs these people had later in life. The thing that stood the test of all kinds of controls and the regression was the education of the parents, family background. So that's very bad for a human capital machine of the Middle East, or at least these two countries. I won't be surprised to find the same thing in other countries, that what really matters is the very beginning, or what your social class is, who your contacts are. One word about the TVE, technical vocational education. Why is this doing so badly? People often say, well, if the schooling isn't working, if academic tracks don't seem to be generating skills, why don't we pull some people and give them the skills necessary, just like in Germany? The trouble is that in every country in the Middle East where that is done, they pick from the bottom. So very quickly, these 15-year-olds who are being sent to vocational schooling is written on their forehead, stupid. So you can imagine what happens to their future in the job market. Not surprisingly, with this education system, with this vocational system, you have a mismatch of skills. The skills learned in schools are not those needed by the private sector. So the public sector, which gave the promises and was fulfilling them for a while, as ERF researchers have argued, principally Raghi, they pulled back. So there were not enough jobs for the graduates. You would think the private sector would come and do something, not just hire these people, but actually send signals to tell them, you are on the wrong train. If you want to get hired by me, a private employer, I'm paying out of my pocket for your wages, I need you to do things for me. You've got to find out what it is that I need you to do. That hasn't happened. We don't know exactly what is wrong, but these signals aren't traveling very well. From the rising private sector, in every country, private sector share is increasing relative to state, but the signal, the quality of the signal that's supposed to go to the families and go to the schools and get the system to redirect from one track to another track, the train track, I mean, hasn't happened. There's a major study that Ahmed Galal coordinated. It's a flagship report for the World Bank, came out in 2007, where they looked very carefully at what was going on in the educational systems, and what they found out very persuasively was that the incentives were not right in the school system. It was the idea was that the teachers, the principals, they didn't have the incentive to train people the right way. They were just doing the easy thing, multiple choice testing and sending the kids along. I want to add to that this legacy of rote memorization, like a quote from the Arab Human Development Report 2002, where they also blamed the education system for all this. I want to add to this the role of the labor market. I think the labor market has a lot to blame, and unless the labor market is reformed, it's not sufficient to have private instead of the public. You need to have people get jobs and rotate. It's only when people are fired from a job that people find out what were the skills lacking. If there is no turnover in the job market, there's very little signal ever sent to people so they can evaluate the skills that are being rewarded in the labor market. So I would say education reform, meaning school reform, very important, but we also ought to keep in mind how to link labor market reform to education. I think this is my last slide, or one of the last, yeah, this is the last one. This is looking forward. What is it that we should be doing? I think that we ought to look at this transition from a school to work very carefully. The school system was designed so that the kids didn't have to do much except work hard, memorize stuff to pass. When they get out of the school, there's a bit of a distance between the school door and the factory door. This is like water, and they don't know how to swim. There is no way for them easily to figure out how they're going to get from one to the other. That's why family connections matter, because they take the kids' hands and put it somewhere else. But you need a mechanism, just like the school, that says you're searching better, you're searching more, you're getting better. one of the things you might want to do in that regard is to mimic the school system. Why do kids work hard? Because they are in competition, they are together. They have peer group pressure, and that gives them the motive to study. It isn't like if you get this education, you're going to get a job or you're going to get the hat. It is that I'm with these kids and we are working, I want to stay with them. These are my buddies. Can we do work to, for example, generate this buddy system in job search? I want to argue that in order to do research on this, we need a different kind of data. We need a kind of data that's experimental. We need to be able to implement policies and observe the outcomes and compare those who received the treatment and those who didn't receive treatment. I heard that the MIT Poverty Action Lab has opened an office in Cairo, and I would like to urge ERF to get involved somehow in this kind of new experimental work so that we can map this little bit of water between where school ends and work begins. Thank you very much.